Hello there, this is Mad Mike, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to go over a show that recently premiered on Netflix, and since I was bored this past weekend, I decided to binge watch it, and that is The Umbrella Academy, which is based off of the comic book from Dark Horse, written by Gerard Way. So this is going to be pretty much a review. There will be spoilers. I know that it says it in the title, but I just want to reiterate that there will be spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled on the show, do not watch this. Turn it off now. Go watch the show. Come back. Watch the review, because I will be going over major plot points. So first, let's just kind of go over the basic premise of the show, which is basically this group of child superheroes that are all adopted by this one guy named Reginald Hargreaves, and they form this superhero group called the Umbrella Academy that is supposed to fight crime and supposedly stop an apocalypse. Then fast forward about, I think it's 17 years later, when the main part of the show picks up, where all the kids are now older and adults, and they're all kind of separated, and they're not really a team anymore, and they all got their own thing going on. And basically, the story is about them trying to thwart this quote-unquote apocalypse that is going to happen. So I'm just going to go over quickly the various actors and their roles, and kind of how they do, and whether or not the character kind of comes through, how they present themselves. So let's go first with Colm Feore, who plays Reginald Hargreaves. Now, Reginald Hargreaves is really only in the show in flashbacks and in a few specific scenes of the show, because basically the show begins with him dying. That's the reason why all the kids come back together, is because he has died. He has passed away. So again, he's mainly just seen in flashbacks from when they were all young and all that stuff, and he's in the very beginning of it when they kind of show how the Umbrella Academy came to be. And I think Colm Feore does a fairly good job of portraying the character. He's not really very emotional. In a lot of ways, he's very stunted. He's not really a father so much as almost like a drill instructor. He's really very cold, very what's the right word, like planning and stuff like that. He's a very scheduled person in terms of the way that he treats the kids. They're not really treated as children. They're more or less just treated as, he's almost like he's training soldiers. It's very strange, and he doesn't really have any kind of like emotional attachment to them at all. Other than the fact that he wants them to train. There's very few moments where you actually believe that he actually gives a shit about any of them beyond the level that they make him famous or something like that. So again, I think Colm Feore does a good job of portraying that character, even though he does not have a whole lot of screen time on the show. And after that, we're going to move down to the first of the kids. Now, the kids are basically given numbers when they come in, and then later on they get names as they get older. They have an android mother who gives them names. And the first one is Tom Hooper, who plays Luther Hargreaves. Now, Luther is an interesting character, and I did look up the comic book just so I can kind of compare the differences, at least from the physical aspects of the characters. And Luther Hargreaves is basically a character who he develops super strength. That's his superpower. But there is an accident in the show. There is an accident that causes him to lose. Basically, he almost dies. And Reginald Hargreaves, in order to save him, for whatever reason, injects him with this serum that then gives him a monkey or a gorilla-like torso. Now, in the comic books, Reginald Hargreaves transplanted Luther's head onto a Martian ape body, and then sent him to the moon. Now, it is I will point out that the show does follow a lot of the beats of the comic book fairly truthfully. When you first do meet Luther, when he's older, he is on the moon. He's been on the moon for 4 years. It's never explained how he got there or how he is able to survive there for as long as because it says he's there for 4 years. Again, they don't really explain how he got there or how he gets back to wind up meeting all of his siblings. But in the show, they basically explain it where he gets this injection and his torso changes, it like grows and it changes into like an 8-man torso basically. Which throughout the show, he's basically wearing these large turtleneck sweaters and overcoats to like kind of hide the fact that his body is kind of mutated and messed up, and he wears these fingerless gloves so they can't really see his hands or anything. And it's kind of kept on the down low. His siblings don't even know really about what happened to him until he kind of explains it, and they do it in a flashback segment at the beginning of one of the episodes where it shows actually what happened to him. Now, he is a fairly interesting character. I would compare him most suitably to Cyclops from the X-Men in terms of he's the leader. He's kind of this no-nonsense guy. He's kind of a moron. He's very stunted in terms of his emotional growth because he is the only one of the children that chose to stay with their father and keep doing missions. He did not choose to leave and start his own life like many of the other kids did after their torturous childhood. He chose to stay, and because of that, he basically never had a life. He always just did missions, and then after his accident, he was sent to the moon. Where he lived for 4 years. And Luther is kind of this character where he's trying to be the leader that he was taught to be, but the problem is that all of his siblings kind of all hated the teachings of their father, so nobody really follows or cares. Some people give a shit. They give a shit about him because he gives a shit about them. But aside from that, there really isn't much camaraderie within the group for a large portion. He also apparently has a thing for his adoptive sister Allison, which again I'll get to her character in a bit. But I think Tom Hooper does a good job at portraying that archetype, and he does a good job at kind of making that transformation believable. You do feel like he's trying to hide something, even though it's very obvious that there's definite physical differences between him and like a normal person, and it is very interesting to see the insecurities, and I think he did a very good job at that character. I did like that character in the show, even though there are characters I do have issues with. And now we're going to move on to a character that I do kind of have some issues with, which is Diego Hargreaves, who's played by David Castaneda. Now, Diego is basically like, and they have changed him from the comic books because I've looked it up, or at least they don't mention this. So Diego's kind of basically, if you want to relate it back to the X-Men, he's kind of like the Wolverine. He's the lone wolf kind of guy. And he basically went off on his own, but he never stopped doing the kind of superhero thing. He kind of just does it as a vigilante now. They do relay that he was once in the police academy, but he got kicked out. And he had an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman who is now a police detective in the show. And basically, his character is, again, he's supposed to be kind of the bad boy. He's supposed to be kind of like the dark and brooding one. And the reason why I kind of had a problem with this is that they try to make him kind of like a Batman-esque character. And he does have street smarts, but he is a complete idiot. And sometimes they do play it for laughs, and it does work. There's a scene where they're trying to get into a house, and he tells them all to breach in their own way, and he dives through a window and like falls flat on the floor, and one of them, who is already inside, says that you are aware the door was unlocked. So he does get played up for laughs quite a bit, even though he tries to do the lone wolf thing. A lot of the time he winds up getting his ass kicked. And here's the thing: is like he's not a character that you really give a shit about in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, he loses people over the course of the show and whatever, but you don't really care about him at all because he's just kind of a dick the entire show. He's not really a sympathetic character in many ways. He just kind of hates his father. for various reasons. Again, they don't really go into it. It's like they go into a lot of the stuff with his brother Klaus, but they don't go into much with him. And like, oh, why does he hate him? And they don't again, they don't really go into any of it in the flashback scenes. Most of the flashback scenes have to do with Diego's relationship with the android Grace, who they all come to know as their mother. And his kind of attitude towards her is that she's more than a machine. She's evolved. She's intelligent. She's sentient. And he really that's the relationship they play up. But the thing is, he has such a bitter relationship with his father, and they don't explain it. They never explain it in the show. And maybe they do that in another season or something like that. But where they give all these other characters such deep backstories, it's kind of weird to see that he is really he has this soul. He has this really really hard motivation to hate his father, but they don't expand upon it at all. It's just there. And I think some of that has to do with jealousy of his older brother. Well, not older brother because they're all the same age, but his brother Luther and a few other things. But again, he really doesn't do that. And they did change him a bit from the comic books now. In the comic books, it says, yes, he does use throwing knives, which he does in the show. But I guess his power in the comic books is that he can hold his breath infinitely. He doesn't need to breathe. But the thing is, in the show, that's never really shown. They never go over it. At least not from what I remember seeing. They never mentioned it in passing or anything like that. His power is basically just like his ability to throw these knives. And they don't really go into it. So I don't know if maybe he does have that power and they just don't go over it, or it doesn't come up and they just go with the throwing knives, or if they just change his power to be something involving the throwing knives. Either way, I don't really think that matters all that much, but it's an interesting little difference. So now we move down to Allison Hargreaves, who's played by Emmy Raver Lampman. Now, this is the most useless character in this entire show. 100% useless, doesn't need to be there. I don't really understand why they didn't make this character more interesting. So basically, I believe she's a film star, because they mentioned that she is famous. She's been on like fashion covers and stuff like that. When you first meet her, she's at some gala or some carpet event where she's getting her picture taken and stuff. But they basically explain that she had a daughter with her boyfriend and her ex-husband now, and they've separated. But they explain that her power is that she basically all she has to do is she says something to somebody, and she can make them do it. So she says, "Oh, I heard a rumor," is how she starts it, and then she says something to them, and they do whatever she says. And they act this out several times in flashbacks where they show that she says, "Oh, I heard a rumor you shot your friend," to like a bank robber, and then he turns around and he shoots his cohort in a couple of times. But again, her power doesn't ever come up in the main storyline. There is one point in the story where she tries to use it and fails. And I will go over that later. But really, she is a complete useless character. There's some moments that she has with Luther, which are supposed to be kind of these romantic moments, and I kind of get that. But at the same time, if she wasn't there, the story would really not be that much different. There's just the only things that she does that really mean anything is that she has these interactions with Vanya, her sister, and that kind of leads to certain events happening. But aside from that, she's really, really useless. She never uses her powers. She might as well have just not had any powers, because it really doesn't make any sense. And then she's not really a sympathetic character either, because all she does is she just talks about her daughter Claire endlessly, and it is really annoying. And the only thing that the reason we find out why they got divorced was because she decided to use her power on her daughter to basically make her do to stop hissy fits and stuff like that. She used to use her powers to like calm her down and stuff like that. And apparently her husband or boyfriend or whatever found out about it and then took custody of the kid. So again, we don't really feel much sympathy for her character. She appears to just be she doesn't appear to have any financial problems at all. Her career seems to be just fine. The only problem she seems to have is with seeing her daughter, because she was a dumbass. And again, that doesn't really ring anything in terms of sympathetic. You are more sympathetic to a character like Luther, who kind of just something happened to him out of circumstance that was out of his control. That's why you feel sorry for his character. You don't feel sorry for Allison, because Allison is just kind of a bitchy cunt. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. And now we move on to, I think, what is actually the most interesting character in this entire show, which is Klaus Hargreaves, who's played by Robert Sheehan. Now, Klaus's power is that he can talk to the dead, but he can only do it when he's sober. And that's a big thing, because basically we find out through some flashbacks that when he was a kid, he was locked in this mausoleum by his father, Reginald, and he was made to talk to the dead. It was basically supposed to be kind of like exposure therapy to try and make him not afraid of talking to dead people. And it actually had the opposite effect. It scared him so much that he never wanted, and that he started going into drinking and drugs and things like that. And he realized that if he was not sober, if he was doing drugs, or if he was, if he was inebriated in some way, that he could not see the dead and they would not bother him. So he just tried to be as messed up as possible for as long as possible, so he would not have to do it. And that's basically explained, is that he has essentially been a drug addict since he was a teenager. But here's the thing: is that this is kind of the weird thing, is they spend a lot of this time in these episodes on certain things, and they really don't expand on other things that would be kind of interesting. Like there's a point where essentially Klaus travels through time, and he goes to Vietnam, and he goes to Vietnam for 10 months, and then he just shows back up, and like he sees a lot of shit. Like he's almost a completely different character when he comes back, and they do very little explanation of this. They have one flashback segment, and then they have a couple of scenes after that where he's kind of trying to explain some stuff. But really, they kind of glaze over it. The entire event itself maybe has like 10 to 15 minutes of screen time, and that's in a 10 episode season where each episode is almost an hour for the most part. But here's the thing: is I enjoy that character. I actually enjoyed that character more than I thought I would. And here's the thing: is that the character himself is fairly complicated. And again, like Luther, this is a character that you feel sympathy for, because he can't control this ability, and he's terrified of it. And you see the situation that he was put in, and that's why you're sympathetic to him as a character, and that's why it works. And that's why it doesn't work with Diego, and it doesn't work with Allison, because they're not sympathetic. Now, we'll go down to the next one, which is just 5. That's all his name is, because he basically disappeared before the other kids were given names. He's played by Aidan Gallagher, and he still, for the most part, is portrayed by his 13-year-old actor, Aidan Gallagher. And even though his story is very complicated, because basically he can jump through space and time. But time is much more difficult. So he can jump through space fairly easily, but in order to jump through time, it kind of takes a lot. And when all of them were kids, he chose to try and jump through time against his father's wishes, and he wound up getting stuck in the future, where he figured out that there was an apocalypse, and he's really the reason why all of the kids decide to kind of he's trying to get everybody together so they can try and stop the apocalypse. And that's really his entire goal. And he's really the mastermind behind a lot of the plot, because he knows a lot more than everybody else does. And unfortunately, he is not willing to make that information known to everybody else. He kind of keeps everything to himself. And that's why that kind of works with that character. Now, the thing with 5 is that he... after he traveled into the future, he basically got into contact with this organization that polices the time stream, and he became basically a time-traveling hitman, and it's very, very complicated. But he basically comes back in time to tell the others about the apocalypse, and then he's kind of in and out throughout the entire story. And again, I kind of like his character just because he's an unapologetic asshole for the entirety of the show. And he has the best fight scenes in the entire show, hands down. He He has no equal, and there's a fight scene in the first. I think it's in the at the end of the first episode that he has that is really, really good. But after you get past him, which again he's a character I like, you get into Ellen Page's character, which is Vanya Hargreaves. Now, Vanya Hargreaves is a character that I really, really don't give a shit about. I don't like her character at all. And I don't necessarily like her. I shouldn't say that. I don't necessarily dislike her because of Ellen Page. I dislike the character of Vanya because she is not a sympathetic character at all, and they're trying to make you sympathetic. Because Vanya turns into the villain of the story, which again, if you watch the first 3 to 4 episodes, you can probably see that there's something that's going to happen there that's similar to that. But by the end of the season, she is the main villain, and you don't really care that she's the main villain. They try to make her a sympathetic villain, and it doesn't work. It just does not work. Because they're supposed to be something like, she wants to get back at all of her siblings because they always shut her out and stuff like that when they were kids, because nobody believed that Vanya had powers when she was a kid. But in reality, she does have powers, and she's the most powerful of all of them. But here's the problem, is that she's supposed to be, she wants to destroy, it shows her just destroying random things. She levels her house to the ground. She kills her android mom and the chimp with a human brain, or whatever the hell he is that they never explain. Mr. Pogo, she kills him, impales him on a deer head. But here's the thing, is again, they don't make you sympathetic to her at all, because she says, oh, well, all my siblings don't like me. It's like, yeah, but they also established the fact that you wrote a tell-all book about the entire family and published it, and it was very detrimental, and you don't expect them to hate you for that. That is incredibly dumb. And on top of that, it's, again, they make it out to be this grandiose thing, and nothing that she does in the show makes you sympathetic to her at all. She is gullible, she is stupid, and she doesn't really understand anything. And again, Luther has the excuse, his character has the excuse because he just stayed at the Umbrella Mansion and kept doing missions for his father. Vanya did not. Vanya left. It is made very clear that she left because she's in this random, rundown kind of apartment giving violin lessons. So she doesn't have an excuse to be socially awkward. She just chose to be. And again, they do kind of make this point of, her father locks her in this chamber that's soundproof. You can tell the inside is soundproof because it has the little pyramid shapes and stuff on the walls. But he locks her in there and leaves her there because he can't figure out how to have her control her powers, and that's the only safe place he can put her. And then when the siblings, when they're older, when they find this out, then they put her back in there, and then she has this moment where her younger self is talking to her through a reflection, and then she gets these white ghost eyes, and she levels the entire place and kills anybody that gets in her way. Again, your siblings did nothing to you. Your father did many things to you, and I can understand you being pissed at Mr. Chimpy. But aside from those two people, none of your siblings did anything bad to you. The only thing, and the thing that you did, was you aired out all their dirty laundry in a tell-all. Now, I don't know if anybody out there is a bit more forgiving than me, but if somebody did that in my family and aired all of our family's dirty laundry out in public for everybody to see in a tell-all book, I'd be pretty pissed. And I probably would never talk to that person again, even if they were my sibling. But to think that people aren't going to be angry at you and ostracize you because of that. And then the other reason that she gives is, oh, I was always separate. Dad always made me separate. Well, yeah, the dad always made you separate. Your brothers and sisters didn't. You didn't go on missions with them because they didn't think you had powers. And you want to know what happens to normal people when they try to stop a bank robbery? They get shot. They die. That's what happens. And again, it's a logical thing. And if they play these people up to be, emotionally damaged, and again, I get that. But you do have to have a little common sense, and that's what makes her an idiot. That's what makes her character a complete idiot, is that anybody with common sense would see, oh, my brothers and sisters get to do all this. Well, your brothers and sister are superheroes. They have superpowers. They can do things that normal people can't. And as far as you know, during the series, you don't have those powers. So why would you then think that they hate you because they never invited you in to do anything? Well, maybe it's also because your father only had them training for 99% of the time. And the thing with Vanya too is her power is that she can turn sound waves basically into energy. So I understand the powers. The powers are not, her powers are not bad. They're actually kind of cool. But again, the execution of the character and what you're supposed to feel for the character is not what you end up feeling in the end. They don't make her sympathetic. They just make her into a moron, and a very overpowered moron. So, to go past that, there's also a couple minor characters. Mary J. Blige, who plays Cha-Cha, and Cameron Britton, who play Hazel, and they're kind of pseudo-antagonists with, their own story. And really that kind of rounds out the main cast. You also have Justin Min, who plays Ben Hargreaves, who is one of the Hargreave kids who died at a younger age, but he's still able to talk to his brother Klaus, because Klaus can see dead people. So basically, that kind of rounds out the cast. But the problem is that, look, the first 2 to 3 episodes of the series are really good. They're really good. They pull you in, especially the first episode. It pulls you in. It makes you wonder what's happening. It raises a lot of questions, which, again, is a good thing. You want a lot of questions in the first episode. You want to hook people. That's what you're supposed to do. So that episode is good, and then the second and third episodes are pretty good as well. Then you get into kind of the slog, which is episodes 4, 5, 6, and 7 mostly. And then you also have episode 8, which is kind of eh. And then 9 and 10 is where it picks up again. Which, again, is kind of stereotypical of television shows for the most part. This is, again, why I prefer movies over television, because it's more compact. You can get a story in 2.5 hours, as opposed to watching 10 hours of watching 10 hours of a show and, maybe not getting, not even getting all your questions answered. And again, I will bring up that the Klaus character, when he goes back in time and goes to Vietnam for a year, or for 10 months, again, it happens in an instant. And then he's completely different afterwards, and you kind of have to connect the dots. Now, they do show a little bit of a brief flashback sequence where it shows him in Vietnam, and it shows a couple of key events there. But I feel like you could have spent a whole episode there. You could have spent a whole episode exploring that, and instead you do it in an instant, and then he's back. And at the same time, you're exploring that, but then you have all these random side tangents, especially at the beginning. There's a lot of side tangents that have nothing to do with the Apocalypse plot, where they think that their father was murdered, and then they think the robot mom did it, and basically there's a whole bunch of these different plot lines that ultimately end up going nowhere. And they find out by the end really why their father died, and they find out more about the Apocalypse. Really, the story with Five is the main plot line, essentially. Like, what he's doing is the stuff that's related to the main plot line. What everybody else is doing is just related to their own individual stories, but Five's story is tied directly into the plot line. That's why His story is really the only one that kind of drives the show along. Everybody else is just kind of off doing their own thing. But specifically, there is one episode, I believe it is episode 6, where it is an entire waste of time. Like you could skip the entire episode almost and not miss a beat. Maybe watch like the first 15 minutes of it. Probably maybe the first 10 minutes and then the last 10 minutes and like the middle half hour or so you can cut out. Because the episode basically involves the group of them talking about what's going to happen and how to stop the apocalypse, and everybody just says, screw it. Then they go off and do their own thing, and then the rest of the episode follows them doing their own thing. And then at the end of the episode, 5 goes back in time to the moment like 10 minutes into the episode and changes the whole thing, and a bunch of different things happen. But basically everything after that point is negated. It didn't even matter. So what's the point of the 30 minutes of that episode other than to fill screen time? It's one of those things. Like that's the thing, is I hate having my time wasted when I'm watching something. If I'm watching it, again, that's kind of the reason why I didn't like The Last Jedi. It's like, okay, Finn and Rose are going off to go disable the tracker. Oh, they never disabled the tracker. Rey's going off to train with Luke. Oh, she doesn't train with Luke. I don't like having my time wasted when I'm watching something, especially a television show, because if you're going to waste my time like that, then why should I even bother watching your show? And again, it ate away 30 minutes of the episode. The episode was essentially useless. I could have just skipped it probably and not missed a beat. But again, we'll go back to that. But that's the problem, is that it feels like some of this was padded out in areas that it shouldn't have been, and areas where it should have been expanded, it wasn't. And some of the characters, like I said, are not written very well, especially the Allison character and the Vanya character are not written very well. Or I should say Allison's character is not written to be very compelling, and Vanya's character is not written well at all. But there are some issues there. And then, the best characters are probably Luther, Klaus. Diego's entertaining, even though he's a moron. He's not sympathetic. But really, those 3 are the most entertaining out of the group, and Luther and Klaus actually have actual character depth as opposed to many of the others. Now, after saying all that, is the series worth a watch? And I will say, look, if you're a fan of certain things, if you're a fan of how do I put this? If you're kind of a fan of like X-Men style stuff, but you don't like action, but you like character moments, you'll probably like this. And the other thing that I will say is I draw a lot of comparisons with this to, in some ways, Watchmen, and not in a good way. Now, I love Watchmen, I love the film, and I love the comic book, but here's the problem: is that the whole show is meant to say these guys are trying to stop the apocalypse, and at the end of the last episode, you think that they've finally stopped it, and then they have this big kind of heel turn ending at the end, where like, oh no, they just caused it in a different way. It still happens, and at the end of the episode, 5 thinks the only way is to send them all back and to try and fix Vanya, and to try that maybe if they can fix the time stream, they can not mess everything up. And again, it literally ends with them time jumping, and then everything turns to ash. Right after they time jump, the area where they are just gets destroyed by a meteorite. And that is not the way the comic ended. They changed the ending to this. And I don't necessarily know if it's because they wanted to continue the story in another season arc, or if they wanted a better segue into another idea. Maybe they weren't going to do the second volume of the comic book. Maybe they're going to do something else. But it could be any number of things. But the season doesn't satisfy you. It doesn't. At the end of it, you're thinking, oh, well, they're going to get to the end of this story arc, and they're going to, they're going to stop the apocalypse, and then we're going to go on more adventures with these characters. No, they don't stop it. It still happens. Everybody still gets vaporized, except for them because they travel back in time. But I think the original ending to the comic book would have been a lot better, and even though it's not necessarily finite, it leaves a lot of room for expansion. It's kind of finite with the Apocalypse plot, which is at the end, and again, spoilers for the comic book if you haven't read the comic book, Vanya is shot through the head, not killed, but she is shot in the head and she goes into a coma before she can unleash her like energy beam or whatever. And at the end of the television show, Allison is about ready to shoot Vanya in the back of the head after she's basically immobilized her four brothers. And instead of shooting her in the head, she points the gun next to her head and fires it, and Vanya faints or whatever, fires an energy blast out of her body and hits the moon. The moon explodes, meteorites shower down, destroy everything on Earth. So now, I'm not saying necessarily if you shot her in the head that would have been different. But again, it's more of a finite type of thing where, okay, and again, they were fairly, from what I read, they were fairly faithful to the major elements of the comic book. Only tweaking a thing here or there for adaptation's sake, which is good. But again, this ending does not give the viewer satisfaction. After watching 10 episodes of this, I was not satisfied with my watching experience. I was saying that, yeah, I don't know what to feel about that. It's like, okay, I have to wait until next season to see what happens in this plot line. And that's fine for a plot line that doesn't seem like it's going to get resolved. But in all honesty, I mean, it's been 10 episodes. They should resolve something, and they really don't. The only thing they do is you give a lot of character moments and stuff like that. That's really all it is. So, back to what I was saying before, is that I compare it to Watchmen in the sense that the heroes do not necessarily save the day. But the difference is, and why it's satisfying with Watchmen and it is not with Umbrella Academy, is that in Watchmen, the reason why they don't fail, or why they fail, is because the villain is smarter than them. He institutes the plan faster, and they can't stop it. And he makes it so they can't stop it. So they would have failed no matter what. In this, you're given every belief by the characters that they can try and do this, even though there's other people saying that it's impossible, that they can't. You're given every hope that they can do this. In Watchmen, your hopes aren't dashed until the last part of the film, where Ozymandias says that he had already done it. He had already blown up all the cities an hour ago. They hadn't. So the heroes never had a chance to begin with to stop him, and he knew that. Now the difference here, obviously, is that you don't really have necessarily a clear villain. And until the very end, you really don't have a clear villain, because Hazel and Cha-Cha are the villains early on, and even though they're attacking the family and stuff like that, they're not really portrayed as this menacing, all-knowing villain. They just work for some people and they have to do stuff. And then Vanya doesn't come in until the very end as a villain character. She doesn't even really become one until the end of the 9th episode. And then the 10th episode is where she's the quote-unquote villain. But this is just something that is, again, it's a problem with the show. It's a problem with the writing, more specifically. And again, that's the reason why Watchmen works so well, is because Alan Moore is a brilliant writer. And that's why that story works so well, and that ending works so well, and why it was as satisfying as it was, even though it was a bittersweet ending, is because it worked. And whereas in Umbrella Academy, it doesn't really work. There's no bigger meaning to their defeat. They just lose. After the whole time that they're trying to stop everything, they just lose. So you basically have 10 episodes of build up with these characters. They let you get to know them and all their personal aspects and everything like that, and then they lose. And then the season ends. Now, if you're going to do that, then have them lose midway through the season, and then have the second half of the season where they come back, kind of like Dark Knight Rises, where halfway through the movie Batman loses, then he has to come back and all that shit. But they don't do that. They just have them lose, and then they're like, all right, there's one more chance. I mean, they got to time travel. If you're going to do that, make an 11th episode, and then show us what the hell happens. Don't leave it on a cliffhanger like that, because it doesn't seem like there's enough to fill a second season. This seems like enough to fill like a 2-hour, like, finale episode almost. Maybe they'll do that. I don't know. But again, it is not a satisfying conclusion. And here's the thing: I would not watch this season again. I might tune in for season 2 just to see if it gets better. But look, if you're a fan of the comic books, I'd say watch it. If you're a fan of character-driven stories with not a whole lot of action, but with some superhero elements, I'd say watch it. If you're going into this thinking you're going to get a Marvel like a Marvel Netflix product or something like that, you're not. Trust me, you are not. Not even close. And there's so much less action in this than what is portrayed in the trailers. And really, after probably about the first 3 episodes, there really isn't a whole crap ton of action. It's more just this random stuff that's happening. So, that's the end of my review on this. I want to know what you think of the Umbrella Academy. Do you like it? Have you watched it? And do you agree or disagree with my points? Remember to hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?